right, let's talk Las Vegas Raiders. Look, it's been a very active, obviously, offseason for the Raiders so far, but there's been some news breaking over the past 24 hours, and I think really defines what the Raiders may be able to do in the draft and involving the quarterback position going forward. Let's get into this news, and we'll talk about more in detail what it means for Vegas on the other side. This is from the AP, the Associated Press. The Minnesota Vikings acquired Houston's first round pick in a pre draft trade Friday, giving them the 11th and 23rd overall selections. So they have two first round picks as potential capital toward their next franchise quarterback. The Vikings sent their second round pick and one of their six for this year and their second round pick in 2025 to the Texans in exchange for the 23rd overall pick and a seventh rounder this year. All right, so the Vikings now have pick number 11 and pick number 23 in the upcoming NFL draft. Kirk Cousins is obviously gone. He's an Atlanta Falcon. So it means right now, I think it's pretty clear to everyone watching that the Minnesota Vikings are building draft capital to move up in the draft to select a quarterback. That obviously puts a dent potentially in the Raiders selecting a quarterback. I'm curious what you think this means, Miles, in terms of what the Raiders options are now, if they've even changed at all. But first, in the comment section below, Raiders fans, what do you think about the Minnesota Vikings building up this draft capital if they trade up in the draft and pick a quarterback? Does it bother you? Or are you more focused on what the Raiders handling things on their own? You think they'll figure it out anyway? Give us your thought on how this affects the Raiders strategy going forward in the comment section below. But Myers, give me your thoughts. What does this mean for the Raiders and how they approach the rest of the offseason?
I think it means, in a sense, the pressure's on as far as the ability to go get in that trade up. We thought it was great. The Raiders put them in the position to trade up if they needed to. But now it's kind of the time where, the Vikings and the Raiders are sitting there and they're both have the capital, the resources. They're both in the ability to trade up in the draft to get that quarterback. Because now we look at the landscape. The Bears seem like they're going quarterback, most likely Caleb Williams, number one overall. The Commanders are probably going quarterback at number two. The Patriots, with trading Mac Jones and not picking up a decent veteran free agent quarterback, they seem like they're going quarterback as well. So that leaves the fourth team on the board, and there's really only four, I would say, top five worthy pick quarterbacks on the board. You've got the Vikings and the Raiders, so someone's getting left out, and you don't want it to be the Las Vegas Raiders. So I think the Raiders were preparing. They didn't exactly know what the landscape of the draft picks were going to be. But now that there's some competition, now's the time to strike and try to, secure your position to get the quarterback. Arizona Cardinals are sitting there at 4. They don't need a quarterback. They might be willing to trade back, but you never know. They might just be all in on Marvin Harrison Jr. or some other person they want at number 4 overall. But I think it's a very opportune time for the Raiders just to say, Minnesota shows they have the capital to potentially trade up, beat them to the punch, and say, all right, we're going to go ahead and, show this is what we want to do. We're not going to wait around. Not going to wait for you to try to beat us out. Let's go ahead and get that quarterback.
So you think the Raiders are basically going to respond and say, we're going to aggressively sort of outgun the Vikings to move up in the draft. That's what you think is going to happen next, or that's what you think the Raiders should do?
That's what I think they should do. I don't know if they will, but I think that's definitely what they should do.
It's interesting to me because I think it all depends, and there's so many unknowns, right? Of course, this time of year is if the Patriots at number 3 are willing to move out of that spot. Because if the Patriots are willing to move out of 3, and theoretically Jane Daniels is available, I think then the Raiders should. I agree with you. But if the Patriots aren't willing to move out of 3, and we know Williams at 1, Drake May at 2, and Jane Daniels at number 3 are all gone, I kind of wait and see what the Minnesota Vikings do here. Because one of the things you get by signing Gardner Minshew earlier this offseason is you get kind of a year to really evaluate Aiden O'Connell, see how the team progresses. And then if Minshew's not the guy, which he probably won't, and if Aiden O'Connell's not the guy, but he probably won't. Look, there's a chance one of them turns out to be a star. Not going to deny that, but just reality is reality. Then you can really attack in 2025. Because here's the thing I think that's very interesting about Antonio Pierce's comments earlier this offseason. And I think people may have misunderstood it a little bit. When he said, I'm not looking for a band-aid, I don't think that meant he was not looking for a band-aid in terms of, I have to get a first-round quarterback this year. I think what he's saying there is like, when I commit to a quarterback, I'm going to make sure I commit to a guy who I believe is the franchise guy. And outside of those top 3, Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jane Daniels, is there a franchise guy in this quarterback class? I like Michael Penix Jr. If he falls to you without having to trade up for him, I think it's a great value. I think a guy like maybe even Bo Nix, early second round, potentially. JJ McCarthy from Michigan's rising up draft boards. I don't like that pick at all. I think that would be a disastrous move if anyone trades up for him. Not a fan of Spencer Rattler either myself. So look, I guess maybe if one of these guys falls to you, you pick him up. But if I'm Antonio Pierce, I'm looking at this situation and say, listen, if I have to trade up to get number 4 guy, if I have to trade up to get Michael Penix Jr. at number 5 overall and give up a bunch of draft capital, doesn't that kind of feel like a band-aid, right? You're looking for the 4th best quarterback. I mean, it's one thing if it's Jaden Daniels, right? But if it's Michael Penix Jr., I don't think so. I think the Raiders, if you listen to Antonio Pierce, I think they're going to take a different approach here. I think they're going to let the Minnesota Vikings do what Minnesota's going to do, and they're going to wait and see what falls to them. And look, if this year is just an Aiden O'Connell versus Gardner Minshew year, I think maybe they take that.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. The more I think about it, the more I listen to what you have to say. One thing that sticks out in my mind is the sense that the Raiders do like a certain guy. Definitely Jaden Daniels is a guy they've been liking. But now that the Washington Commanders get a guy like Marcus Mariota, who stylistically is somewhat like Jaden Daniels, as in, an athletic style of quarterback, definitely not on the same caliber. Much worse, I would say, as a prospect of a guy than a guy like Jaden Daniels. But that's interesting because I think potentially they could possibly go Jaden Daniels at 2 here. That's an option that's on the table. And so in that lies, I think it would be nice if they were aggressive and went for it. But even if they are able to get to that number 3 spot, they could be stuck picking, Drake May. Not saying that's a bad pick, but it could be the only option. And so you're not really even the sure thing anymore as far as getting a guy that you like. So I think, like you said, it matters what happens on draft day. So we're probably going to be on draft day, seeing how the board falls, Raiders standing idly by, trying to jump to that number 3 or number 4 spot, however it pans out, if their guy is there. But it's like you said, if not, then they probably feel okay with a guy like Gardner Minshew. He is a quality quarterback. He's not your future of the franchise, but he is a guy that you can get by with. But the more I think about it, the more I look at it, we're going to see some moves on draft day, and it'll be very interesting to see if they're able to make that leap up the board.
Yeah, because I'm looking at the draft order in front of me right now, and if you go through the order, after the Arizona Cardinals at 4, like you mentioned, you have the Chargers at 5. They're not changing quarterbacks. Giants not changing quarterbacks. Titans, they're not changing. Atlanta just signed Kirk Cousins. The Bears will have gotten their quarterback already. The Jets of Aaron Rodgers. Then you have the Vikings. Theoretically, they would have traded that away. So they're at that point, they would have already gotten their quarterback. Whoever's going to get at that pick won't pick a quarterback. The Broncos, maybe they get a guy, but it doesn't really feel like Sean Payton wants a rookie. We'll have to see what happens there. And then 13, you've got Las Vegas then. So it's one of those things where the Raiders essentially could just sit and wait, and maybe a Michael Penix Jr. just falls to them anyway, who I think at 13, not trading at all is a solid value, right? I think if the Minnesota Vikings trade up into the top 5 and those other 3 guys leave and they're stuck with JJ McCarthy and they reach for him, I think Minnesota, hey, good luck to you. Just trade it up to get the next, I don't know, Mac Jones kind of player, right? So I think at this point, the Raiders, like you said, have to do a lot of sitting and waiting. But I think this definitely throws a unique situation at them. But I want to go back to Antonio Pierce's comments. He's not looking for a Band-Aid. And to me, that means he's not going to go after any first-round quarterback. He's going to go after his guy. Now, we don't know who that is yet, but I think that speaks a lot. I think the Vikings are taking an opposite approach. They're just trying to go after the highest rated quarterback they can get. The Raiders are taking it differently. They're looking for their ideal fit. I think the Raiders strategy is the right way to approach it. But regardless what happens, I think it's going to be an exciting stretch here. I think the Raiders are definitely primed for some big moves, and we could see a huge trade, heck, as early as tomorrow and as late as game time draft night.